Welcome to the Meditation Conversation, the podcast to support your spiritual revolution. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin, and I loved connecting with David Strickel in this episode. He's going to be giving you many gems on abundance and manifestation. He's had a really interesting life with serious family challenges, which he's been able to spin into gold in a very real way. And he generously shares so much wisdom in that regard in this episode. David Strickel has spent a lifetime going deep into his inner wisdom, which he believes all humans possess, but rarely fully access. He now refers to this as the stream. The name seemed perfect because the consciousness is pure source that flows through him and offers so much. David's mission is to share this with humanity, and he will dedicate the rest of his human journey to sharing this with others. In his sharing, he's launched his mindset practice, Taya, for Trust Your Abundance. Taya is the practical application of the stream's teachings. So we'll get to that in just a second. Be sure you check out karagoodwin.com, where you can get a free 10-minute meditation. And if you want support for your meditation practice, I have a 21-day online program to help you develop your own practice. There's also the Healing Hearth membership, where we get together online and meditate, and you get assistance with your questions about meditation and life. I also have a recorded sacred geometry workshop series available. All of this and more on karagoodwin.com. And now enjoy this episode. Well, welcome, David. I'm so excited to have you on the Meditation Conversation. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Kara.
So let's start by talking about your journey and what led to the stream.
Certainly, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to move through it as quickly as possible. Really, the stream is my inner knowing of source consciousness, and we all have it. It is worked out of most of us through cultural teachings and religion and things like that in early childhood. And I had the good fortune of having a very disconnected early childhood from my parents.
The good
Uh,
fortune.
it ended up being good fortune,
Yeah.
absolutely, that I had parents that weren't really interested in raising me or even me being their child. I was supposed to be the thing that was going to fix their marriage and didn't. And then when that fell apart, they kind of both just checked out in their own way.
Oh,
So I was
bless
really left to my
you.
own devices to sort of learn life and raise myself, essentially. So I never stopped listening to the inner knowing that we just had as young children, that playful, confident, inner knowing that you see children exhibit. I kept listening to that. And so when the world would say one thing, I would have sort of an inner knowing that would very often challenge what I was being taught. So that made school interesting. It made church and Sunday school interesting. I was actually asked to leave Sunday school at some point,
Wow.
at one point. But the inner knowing is the thing that actually allowed me to survive my childhood, which was difficult, and thrive as an adult. So I just never stopped listening to that. Moving into adulthood, really my teen years were challenging because my immediate family was very poor. My extended family was upper middle class. So I was around cousins and even a half sister that had lots of money and nice things and took vacations and went to summer camp and did all the things that my brother and I just could not do because our mother was minimum wage. My father paid very minimal support, and we lived like very, very poor people. So I remember at age 14, which was 1982, telling my older brother, Doug, that if you believe something is true, it will come true for you if you truly believe it. And we were really talking about material things at this point because, again, we didn't have the things that everybody else around us had. And he thought I was crazy, and probably still does on some level. But I really ran with that. And by the time I was in high school, I was living the life of a wealthy kid, even though I wasn't one.
By
So I
the
was
time you were in high school?
high school. I had a brand new car. I had a fancy
What?
watch. I had a Tag Heuer watch. I had, Ralph Lauren clothes, which was kind of the thing back then. Again, we're talking
Wow.
about the 80s here. Preppy clothing. I had money to do stuff. I lived in a roach infested 2-bedroom apartment with my mother and my older brother, but I had all the stuff outwardly of the rich kids. I just knew how to manifest that early. And so, it was different ways, things came to me in different ways, but I just had a belief system. And I realize now that the universe always showed up for me to support my belief system. So I moved into adulthood believing as a poor child that money and material things was the answer to everything. And so I did manifest a lot of money, material things in my 20s and 30s. I lived very, very well for my age, especially with my background and lack of formal education. And then I got into my early 40s and realized, okay, I have all the stuff, but I'm still not really happy. What's going on here? I've got the big house and the fancy cars and all that, all the stuff that I thought was about happiness. And the stuff is nice, but there was still just this huge missing piece in my life. So that's when I started meditating. And I began meditating in 2010, and pretty quickly into my meditation practice. And I didn't really know, I would try to read a conventional book about meditation, and it just didn't always feel right to me. I knew I had to find my own way. So I would literally sit in my comfortable chair in the family room in silence and just breathe and be quiet. And that's how I meditated. Well, pretty soon into that meditation practice, I had what I had no clue even existed, what we now call a Kundalini awakening, where this energy erupted at the base of my spine and sort of electrified me. And when that happened, everything really started to change. I became a much more quote unquote spiritually focused being. I really started not caring so much about the material stuff. I really wanted to explore what we would call spirituality. And I went really, really deep into that. And I was very inspired by the Abraham Hicks teachings. And I will tell you that I was not initially inspired by that, however, because I had a psychic tell me, even before I was meditating, because I would go see psychics trying to figure out, why do I have this inner knowing about things that no one else seems to have? Why do I understand things on a level that other people don't seem to understand? And finally, I met a wonderful psychic who told me that I was a channel and that everyone has this connection, but I'm actually here to share this. Well, at the time she told me that, I wasn't prepared for that. I thought it was weird. Was very judgmental about it. I didn't want to be one of those weird woo-woo people at that time, and had a lot of fear around it and things like that. And I really had to work on sort of moving past all of that. And then once I did, the Abraham material sort of resurfaced for me. She tried to introduce me to it at that time. I didn't want any part of it. I thought it was a religion she was trying to indoctrinate me into, or some cult or something. And years later, after this Kundalini awakening, I really embraced those teachings and went really deep into it and realized, yes, I've been getting this my whole life. And now I'm hearing someone else speak what I've been receiving since I was a child. And it all makes so much sense. It was so logical. It really made sense of life far more than religion ever made sense to me. So I really leaned into those teachings. But at one point, I became rather frustrated because I felt like, well, there's more to this than just the manifestation of money and material things. And I'm not faulting Abraham for that. It really is just the way that message is delivered, that's what that audience is really focused on. And I sort of had already moved through that period in my life. And I wanted sort of the other stuff. And they would get into it every once in a while, but not really. And there was a lot of frustration around the practice, the base message there of just get happy and you get everything you want. Because I found that no matter what I did, I couldn't just be happy all the time. I couldn't forget about the difficult parts of my childhood. At this point, I'd had a mother that told me to commit suicide at one point, who was very physically abusive and mentally abusive,
Oh,
a father
David.
who was very absent in my life. All of those things, I was still holding on to all the, what you might call trauma of all of that, well into my 30s and even early 40s.
Of
And I
course.
realized that I can't just forget all of that stuff and pretend like it didn't happen and just be happy all the time just to get all the stuff that I want. I've already gotten all the stuff, and it's not enough. I need to work on all of that early childhood stuff that I've been avoiding for decades. When I went into that and allowed my source connection to really speak to me, that none of this stuff were bad things that happened to you. These were all things that are just an experience that you had that propelled you to where you are now and where you're going. And the only reason you label that as bad or traumatic is because you live in a society that's created this notion of what a parent's supposed to be, what a mother's supposed to be, what a family structure is supposed to look like. We have a lot of human created things that I refer to very often as the matrix, the human created belief system, that has positive aspects, The family structure is not all bad. But the negative aspects are when you don't get that ideal family structure, you feel like you're damaged goods in some way. And I did go through a lot of life feeling like that. And then, but I realized, well, wait a minute though, because they were so disconnected, I've held on to this knowing that has done wonderful things for me. I seem to understand things better than the average person. I understand life and universe and the process of creation and why we're here and all of this. That's all a gift, in my opinion, that I wouldn't have gotten had I had the typical childhood with the typical, what society thinks parents are supposed to be. So when I started making all of those things positives and making those things gifts, that detuned the trauma. So now a lot of my work is centered around that. It really cleaning up all of the transgressor energy that we all carry with us, that is the basis of all of our limiting beliefs. That when we clean that stuff up, we do get the material things that we want and the experiences that we want and the relationships that we want. Life gets a lot better because we're allowing our vibration just to raise naturally. It really is our natural state of being, if you think about it. So I'm sort of bringing us back around to a practice that allows us to live in a natural state of abundance and joy and great clarity in our modern world where we're bombarded with information to the contrary all the time. So that's kind of the synopsis of everything. So I had a very high paying corporate job. I had that Kundalini awakening in 2010. By 2017, I left the high paying corporate job with no real plan, but just a passion to share this with the world, having faith that I would be okay somehow. And that's when I started the Stream of David podcast. I wrote my first book and published it. I started a online coaching program to teach this mindset practice that I've created. And I now have my second book out that's been out for almost a year. And the audiobook is about to drop, called the Taya Practice. That's the practice that I've created around all of this. Because the frustrating part with all of the channeling for me was, okay, all this information is wonderful, but I see people struggling, and I myself struggle to apply it in my life systematically. And I realized the good thing about things like religion is it gives you structure. It's a belief system. And what I have found is that we cannot live without a belief system. It's our operating system, if you think about it. We're like computers, and a computer needs an operating system to function. Well, humans need an operating system. So even people that I know that identify as atheists still have a belief system, though. They believe that politics is very important very often, or that money is very important, or some ego-driven thing is very important. And it's okay that they believe that, because that's just their personal belief system. So what I've come to really understand is that we all operate in a belief system, and Taya is a practice of aligning your belief system with universal law, completely void of ego, which means no rules, no judgment, no worship, anything like that. It really allows us to operate our lives in harmony with universal law, which again is our natural state of being.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. There's so much in there. I mean, you're like an alchemist. You're helping people to alchemize their trauma into gold, you know. I'd love to talk about the channeling piece that you touched on in terms of, it sounds like that's where a lot of the Taya came from, and a lot of your inspiration came from. Do you have a sense of who or what you were channeling, or did it vary based on the circumstance, or what can you tell us about that?
That's been a journey for me, because again, channeling to me was something that was very weird, because I would watch, when someone told me that I was a channel, I knew what channeling meant. People say they're channeling Whitney Houston when they sing and things like that. So I knew what the word meant, but I didn't really know what a channeler was. And so I would, at this point we had YouTube. So I could go, put in channeling, and things would come up that really freaked me out.
And I'm
People that
sorry,
seemed like they were possessed.
was this after your Kundalini awakening or prior
Even
to?
before that, even
Okay.
before the Kundalini awakening, I would really, because I was told that I was a channel and it was this special thing, and I kind of didn't want any part of it, but I had to explore it anyway. And the reason I saw the psychic in the first place was because I was exploring all of this. So I did listen to her. I believed her because everything else she told me was spot on. So I started exploring it. And when I did, I landed on a few people that it felt like they were possessed. And the information wasn't bad. It was kind of the same information that I was getting, but the way they were sharing it, it really seemed forced and very possessed to me. And so I had to really detune my own judgment of all of that. And I have now. I don't judge any of it now. But at that time I did. But when I discovered Esther Hicks, and somebody actually led me to Esther Hicks, and when I sat and listened to those original tapes from 1988 of Esther and Jerry Hicks, I'm sure your audience is probably somewhat familiar with that, the original teachings of Abraham, that did not freak me out at all. It didn't seem weird. I wasn't judging it. So I credit Esther Hicks for allowing me to accept that I'm a channel, because she made it palatable for me. I wasn't judgmental. I wasn't fearful about it. It just seemed very natural. Even though back then, Esther Hicks' channeling of Abraham was also sort of an accent and very different than her, where today she's more comfortable with it and it's just her sharing what she calls Abraham. But in the beginning, I sort of thought, okay, I'm channeling an entity. Abraham talks about a group of non-physical entities. And what I've come to understand, just since I've started sharing it publicly, we're all channeling source. That's what it is. It's source energy. Because if you get out of the physical, the conduit that connects us to the universe is source. So I think that it doesn't matter if somebody believes that they're channeling an alien, or somebody that was a human that is no longer human, or some entity that was never even physical. I do believe it really all comes down to being source energy. And so now I just say I channel source. And that doesn't mean that I think I'm God or that I think I'm special or anything like that. I do believe we all have source in us, and that when we're operating at our best, at our highest vibration, we are all channeling source in our own way. I don't think that we're all meant to be channels in terms of writing and speaking and teaching. I'm a big fan of Adele. I saw her live this year in concert. And I saw her in an interview with Oprah, and she said, when I begin to sing, it's not coming from me, it's coming from someplace else. And I was like, yeah, you're channeling. You're allowing source to flow through you in a unique way to you that is your gift of song. And it's interesting, when I saw her live in Las Vegas back in February, she had a terrible cold. She could barely speak. And she doesn't do lip syncing, I can promise you that. But when the music started, she started singing. It was Adele. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't the coughing and the sick and the labored voice. It turned into something else, but it was live singing. And like, she's channeling right now. That's exactly what she's doing. So we all do it in our own way. So I've really just leaned into, this is source consciousness that I'm sharing. And if you believe it and choose to give it power, it will be helpful to you. If you don't, that's okay too. This isn't gospel. There's no mandate from what I call the stream, which is what I refer to this as. I don't say Abraham or a name. I asked for a name a long time ago. And by the way, I had to teach myself to do this, because the inner knowing was just there. I would think about something and clarity would just drop into my mind. It could be very complex clarity or very simple clarity. It's like, boom, it's just there. That's gone on my entire life. The writing it and speaking it, the writing it part, I had to figure out how to do, because again, you've got like all of the information of the universe in your mind. It's way more than my mind could comprehend or that I could communicate, especially in writing. So I had to really teach myself to slow down and write it in a sort of an automatic writing way. And then the speaking part, I sat in my car. I lived in a condo. I didn't want my neighbors to hear me channeling. So I would go down to the parking garage, lock myself in my car for hours, and channel into my iPhone voice recorder. And that's how I taught myself to channel. Early on, it was very forced. The first time I ever channeled publicly for anyone was on the Stream of David podcast. You can go back right now to the Stream of David podcast and listen to episode 1. That's the very first time I ever channeled for anyone publicly, ever. It was more forced for me back then. It's gotten a lot more comfortable and more like me now. Now, when I'm teaching, it just starts happening. People that really know me, they say, I can tell when the stream is really kicking in and that you're channeling. I think the channel message is great. However, I believe the Taya practice is the most important thing I have to share, because the message from source is very consistent, very consistent. I can tell you right now what their answer would be to just about everything. The putting it into practice is the challenging part for people. How do I put a source consciousness mindset into practice while I'm an ego-driven human being? We're not going to get rid of our ego. We can detune it, certainly, but the concept of ego death, I don't believe that. I've detuned my ego significantly, but our ego serves a purpose. It does move us forward. It gives us desires. It's our establishment of preferences and things like that. So that's its functionality. But the fear and judgment components have been significantly overdeveloped across humanity, and we can detune that stuff. And that's a huge life-changing thing when you do that.
I love that. And I love what you were saying around the early kind of channeling that you, not that you were doing, but that you were tuning into when somebody said that, oh, you're a channel. And so you started looking into what is this and what is it like when people do it. And the Esther Hicks like abundance model of, I mean, I keep saying this lately with, because I have been working on manifestation, but I really kind of resist that word. The word itself, makes me think of like people on yachts that are like, manifested my, look at
Hashtag
me.
manifest. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, here are all my hundreds that I'm like,
Yeah.
just like throwing into the air type of thing. And that I just to everything that you started this episode with, where it's like, I had that and it wasn't filling the void for me. And so it's like, if we can expand what we even think of in terms of manifestation, but like creating the reality that we want and the creating like the highest and most beneficial life experience for ourselves, and utilizing the laws of the universe, in order to do that. And understanding that we are constantly in co-creation. So how do we really step into that and stop creating by accident, but actually be intentional about what we're calling in? So all of that really resonates with me. Um, I would love to know how that kind of translated into Taya for you, Trust Your Abundance, in terms of like, okay, well, this doesn't really resonate, like how we've sort of perverted manifestation in a certain way, and how you sort of made that alignment within your own life and then through your own teachings and what you share with people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. For me, I told you I had the experience of living 20 years as an adult in a very financially abundant scenario, and then realizing that, okay, this isn't everything. And what I see happening, it seems like when people start manifesting money, especially if they didn't come from money, then they think, okay, at some point I'm finally going to be happy, but I need more. I need a newer car, bigger yacht, second home, bigger first home, more, and it never ends because they've established that belief system that, I'm finally going to reach a place of happiness once I have just one more thing. And of course, consumerism is heavily promoted across our society. We are told that the new handbag and the new shirt and the new trip and all of this stuff is what happiness is. And that stuff, I still say, I love nice things. I just came back from a wonderful European vacation that was very much a luxury vacation. And I loved it. It was a great time. But my message is none of that stuff is really going to make you truly happy if you're not truly happy first. So why not work on all of the things that are holding you away from happiness? Make yourself a happy person. If you understand the law of attraction, and I'm sure your audience does, if you put the cart before the horse, it works much better. So when you make yourself happy first, all of the things that you think you need to be happy will come in a lot easier because you're no longer placing all this pressure that actually chases them away. We all know that when you believe you really, really, really have to have something to be happy, whether it's, a new job, a new car, a baby, a marriage, a relationship, whatever, those things just seem to go further and further away from you because you believe you need it. We talk about the vibration of need a lot in the practice because it's very easy in our society to activate that vibration of need. But then the things that you don't believe that you need so much that you just appreciate, boom, they just show right up. And we all have something. There's something, whether it's good health or friendships, or there's something in all of our lives that we manifest with ease. So what I always say is take a look at that in your mindset around that and just layer that mindset onto everything else systematically, and you will see things start to really shift. because when you're just kind of a sweet spot, you want to believe that you are something to receive it. That is the secret of manifestation, but really everything is a manifestation. That's why I don't use that term a whole lot, especially when you get deeper into my teachings, because everything that we experience all day long is our manifestation. We are manifesting our reality all the time. Some of the things are wanted and some of the things are unwanted. But really, that's a very natural process for us. We did not come here to just manifest desires, obviously, because no one is just manifesting desires. Even the people that are propped up as the most successful among us, the most beautiful, the most talented, the wealthiest, all have problems, and we hear about their problems very often. Well, that's because we're moving through this polarity. We're moving through this sort of up and down polarity in this environment that sort of moves us up into higher vibration of source and down into the lower vibration that is very ego driven. So the higher we go, the happier we are, the more blissed out we are, the less we need things to make us happy because we're already there. And the lower we go, the more we need change to make us happy in some way. So understanding polarity is a huge, huge thing. And it's a big part of the practice that, yes, we're all moving through polarity all the time, but we all have this default vibration that really is dictating what our lives are, that we've created via our belief system. So if we believe the world is damaged and broken and terrible, and we're on TikTok and, in places like that, consuming that information, that's what your feed is, then of course you're driving your vibration down. Because when you're judging something and you're fearing something, you are separating yourself from source consciousness. So a lower vibration is going to feel worse. You're going to be more anxious. You're going to be more stressed. You're going to be more worried about yourself and your fellow humans. And you're going to be receiving evidence of that in what's showing up in your life. You're going to have more problems at work and in your relationship and in your home and in all of these things because your default vibration is lower. So what I found is when we start detuning the things that drag our vibration down, and this is a system I set up for myself first after 2010, and it worked, and I started teaching it to other people in 2017. And what I've seen is the transformation is that people that are stuck in depression, anxiety, fear, and things like this can get in and work on detuning those things. And we always look for the origin, the early childhood stuff, what set up our belief system. Usually it's mom and dad, our earliest teachers. It's not their fault. It's by design that they're our earliest teachers. And there's things that we learned in our early childhood environment that were positive for us, and there's things that were not. And again, that's really the design of the universe, that we are automatically disconnected from our parents simply because we're all born up to speed with the time that we enter in. And we're all different than our parents. We have different values and belief systems. So just think about your belief system and your values compared to your parents, and then compare that to your grandparents. And you see how it evolves over time. So automatically, if you were born in 1995, your parents who were born in the 60s or the 70s perhaps are going to have just a different vibe than you are. So there's going to be some level of disconnect that's going to cause you, i.e., force you to create your own unique belief system. You can't just mimic theirs. And I know some people get really close to mimicking their parents, especially if they had what the Matrix considers really good parents. And what I notice is these folks tend to have sort of a steady life, but they'll always disrupt it in some way. They'll create an illness or some sort of major disruption in their lives because there's value in that disruption. There's value in all of our challenges because it forces us to create something new. And I've come to understand that that's the entire purpose of physical existence, is to come to a polarized environment where we're of that environment. We enjoy it very much. We enjoy, the scenery of Earth. We enjoy food. We enjoy camaraderie and all of these things that we really like and we really want to experience while we're here. But on our path to experiencing these things, we all have these challenges. And that's because polarity is dragging our vibration down from time to time. And we know that because we don't consistently just feel great all the time. There are days that we're really high. Naturally, we just feel good for no specific reason. And there's other days that we just wake up and we just feel awful. We feel terrible. We feel hopeless sometimes. Why is that? We all are polarized. So that's because of this polarity that just takes our vibration down. But when you've created a belief system for yourself that life is tough and life is hard and everything's going badly and the world is just, spiraling out of control and all of these beliefs, that's going to bring your vibration down, your general vibration down, and it's going to create a lot of anxiety. So you cure that by detuning the fear and judgment around all of that stuff. And that starts to really change your ego. Your ego goes from being a fear and judgment mechanism to being a simple discerner of preference. I prefer this, I don't prefer that. And you view humanity and say, my preference is that there's not a war in Gaza right now. My preference is that Ukraine is not being attacked right now. But I'm not going to judge it and fear it, because the more I fear and judge it, the more power I'm giving to it in my own life, and the more power I'm giving to it for the collective of all of humanity, because we all participate in that.
Mm.
And that's a hard thing for people to understand, because I do a lot of TikTok. And I'll, in 3 minutes, I'm giving you sort of how the entire universe works. And of course, people will be really triggered by that sometimes. Well, that's great. That's easy for you to say. You're a white man in the United States. What if you were there? Well, this mindset thing, though, is huge, because I do believe in the collective consciousness of humanity. And I do believe that fear and judgment is going to bring you more of what you're fearing and judging. I see that in my life. I see that in other lives of people that I work with. And if you think about it, you just multiply that across all of humanity, notice that the things that we really fear and push against just get bigger and bigger and bigger and become a more dominant factor, until finally, I think we just collectively get bored with it. And we sort of turn our focus to something else. Then all of a sudden that power seems to shrink a little bit. And that situation, whatever it is, kind of just dies and fades away eventually. So why not just take greater control of that in our own personal experience and detune the stuff that drags our vibration down, so that we can be happier beings? Understanding that if you want to help your fellow human, there's nothing better that you can do than just be in that high vibe state for yourself.
Mm. I love that. And thank you for suggesting that I was born in 95. I'm going to have to pull that out, and that will be like just a continuous reel
Well, I'm usually the older
every
guy
day.
on the podcast, so I try to speak in terms of 90s, not 60s, but yes.
Well, I was a senior in high school, so thank you so much for suggesting that was my birth year. Um, so I love what you're talking about, and I couldn't agree more with you. Um, I'm curious about some of the changes that you've noticed in your own life as you've adopted these practices. Because you said you've seen it in your life, you've seen it in your clients' lives, and it sounds like it was about 2017 that you started working with other people on this. But up until then, you were kind of your own, not guinea pig, but like you were testing it out on yourself, I guess. Um, how how was that for you? Like what have you noticed through it?
Lots of things. After that 2010 experience, there were things that I was holding on to in my life out of fear. I was certainly in a relationship that was not working, that was lasting way longer than it should have. And I was afraid to let go of that relationship, because I thought I was going to be all alone in the world, because I don't have a relationship with my family. I speak to my siblings and my stepmother at this point, who's the only one left of parental figures. But I'm not close to any of them. So, and I didn't have a lot of close friendships, because I'm kind of the weird woo woo. I don't really connect on that level. Like if somebody starts talking about politics, I will say I don't really give politics that much power in my life. I just refuse to give it that kind of power, because I have lived enough to when, even though I'll vote, my candidate does not win, my life goes on and is fine anyway. So I just don't get all fearful about politics. Well, that just stops people in their tracks when you say things like that. So I don't have a lot of close friendships. I try to keep it very light in social situations. I don't try to get it too deep into Taya unless somebody really wants to hear about it. So for me, holding on to that relationship was kind of a big first thing to get out of that. Like, I don't need this. I can be alone and be okay with just me. I don't need the big house. It's just bogging me down right now. It's just a sign of all these things that, once meant so much to me that now means nothing. So got out of the relationship, sold the 4,200 square foot house and moved into a 650 square foot condo and loved it. Loved that I had to count how many glasses I could have that would fit in the cupboard, where before I, had everything. So really just loved downscaling and downsizing my life at that time. Got into really good physical shape, spent my 40s, in my 30s. Even though I had all of this information, again, I just focused specifically on money and material things. I was a 300-pound person, big guy, and got into really good physical shape in my 40s. So better health, better physicality, out of the non-functioning relationship, let loose, let go of a lot of things that just I didn't really need anymore. Simplified my life quite a bit. And the last frontier for me was the job, because I had a very high paying corporate job. I had really climbed the ladder. I have no formal education. I really quit school in the 10th grade, got a GED, started my own company, because I believed I could, and I did. But then when I got into corporate, I did very well. And it was a mindset. I taught mindset to salespeople, and I made very successful commission-based salespeople. And the company liked me so much, they just kept giving me more territory. The more territory I got, the more money I made. So I was making a lot of money, and very, very successful in that regard. So the job was the last frontier for me, to quit the job. When I got to the point where I was so detuned of fear and judgment around the woo-woo sharing of anything spiritual, where I was ready to write a book and do a podcast. I had gotten to this point where I could not keep this information to myself any longer, because I was coaching people professionally how to become successful commission-based salespeople, and it was working very well. But then when you start getting close to people, you hear about all their family problems and all of that. Well, in a corporate structure, it's not appropriate for me to tell somebody what to do with their marriage or their children or any of that. So I refrained. I didn't like dealing with HR, so I just stayed away from all of that stuff. So, but I thought, gosh, I could really help these folks if I could do it outside of the corporate environment. And so that's what I did. I started the first book, and I started the podcast in 2017. And the guidance from source was, well, if you're going to teach people to trust their abundance, you've got to be the one that really trusts, and you've got to jump out of the airplane with no parachute and figure out how you're going to live. And this is somebody who grew up very poor, wanting all the nice things. I had manifested all the nice things, and I still liked them. I still do to this day. And I was walking away from this big paycheck. And I was really having to trust that, okay, I'm going to be okay. And the podcast documents my entire journey of all of that, from quitting the job, writing the book, starting the online coaching program, being very successful with that early on, then hitting a period of not being successful with it, having all of my money just completely vanish.
Wow.
But coming to really understand that if we trust our abundance, it always returns, even if it leaves us for a while, because again, we're still going down vibrationally sometimes. So when my nest egg started shrinking, I had money coming in from the business, but then when I got worried about the backup, that's when the money stopped coming into the business. And so here I was, living in this $1 million home in Palm Springs, driving a $90,000 car. I had a $30,000 Rolex on my wrist, going into Ralph's. If you're familiar with California, Ralph's is a supermarket, with coupons to buy bacon and tuna.
Wow.
Because I was on keto at the time, and it was all I could afford. I had cash in my pocket. My bank account was empty. My credit cards were maxed out. So here I am teaching abundance, trust your abundance. And I really set up a scenario for myself where I had nothing left but trust. And that was huge, Carol. That was huge for me, to let my money run down to zero and realize that, oh, yeah, it's easy to trust when you have a few $100,000 in the bank. But when you're down to zero, can you still trust? And it was almost like some of these, if you were raised Christian, these biblical stories of where things were really, people set these scenarios up where they really had to question. And I didn't mean for it to be, it just happened naturally, that I was literally down to $0 and no credit. And I had the cash in my wallet to buy food, drove the $90,000 car with the Rolex watch and the coupons, and counting out and having to add up in my mind. I'd never used coupons in my life. Adding up in my mind how much money was in my wallet so I wouldn't be embarrassed at checkout.
Wow.
And I think I even had to put something back at checkout, the guy with the Rolex on. So it was pretty comical. I was entertained by it. I wasn't really embarrassed by it at that point. I was just like, this is just damn funny that I've created this for myself. Get home, and I'm not kidding, open the mailbox, and there's a letter from the IRS that I owe extra taxes.
Oh my gosh.
So I was
Wow.
like, okay, I get it. I get it. I need to detune. This is the next level for me. I have to let go and really trust. Here I am teaching it. Now I'm being held accountable to that. And when I did that, everything changed.
Mm.
Then it really took off. And again, it's a business, so there's ups and downs in my world and things like that. But my lifestyle has never faltered for a moment. I believe that I live in a nice house. I believe that I drive a nice German car. I believe that I have food to eat, that my dog eats the best dog food there is. These are my beliefs. And I've created those throughout my lifetime. And I realize that even when the bank account is zero, all those things, even if they disappear for a moment, they come right back because I
Mm.
have a vibrational set point that I believe that this is how I live. And it's nothing like my childhood life. So we all do that. We all have that ability to create a vibrational set point where this is what I expect. And where we get tripped up when people start learning about the law of attraction, right away they go to yachts and Lamborghinis and mansions. And if you're living in a 1-bedroom apartment and taking the bus and you're trying to go from that to a yacht and a Lamborghini and a mansion, you're probably going to be unsuccessful. Just because you can bring yourself to that belief while you're in high vibration. When you go to a seminar and you get all pumped up, or you listen to a podcast, or you read a new book and you get all pumped up about it, you can create a little period of belief for yourself. And those things will come to you if you can maintain it. Most people cannot maintain that, however. Most people will go back down in vibration. The bank account will go empty, or the new unexpected bill from the IRS shows up, or something like that. They go down their spiral. They suddenly undo everything the universe is doing for you in terms of manifesting something that you want. So a quantum leap from being broke to being a billionaire is huge. So what we do in the practice is we don't even worry about that stuff. We start talking about what are the things that created the belief system in the first place. Let's detune that. Because once you detune that, and by detune it, I mean you are going to authentically change your perspective around it. And it takes work to authentically do that. So you're going to change your perspective regardless of where you are on the vibrational scale, so that your abusive childhood or your impoverished childhood or your lifetime illness is viewed through appreciation, which is the source perspective, instead of judgment and fear. And that's what detuning really is. So
Mm.
finding authentic, I keep saying authentic because it's so important to understand we're not bypassing anything. We're not putting on rose colored glasses and pretending like everything is, oh, I'm a woo woo spiritual person. Everything is so great. That always comes with a crash for everyone. So I would rather take a little more time and establish some patience. And trust me, no one is more impatient than me naturally, but learning patience. And as you get older, you do learn patience usually. That, hey, in time, everything works out. In time, everything will be revealed of why this happened for you and not to you. If you really give it time and appreciate. That appreciation tool is so important because that is source perspective on everything. And when you learn to apply it to every aspect of your life and across humanity, everything, the whole landscape of humanity just starts to change for you.
Mm.
Then all of the stuff that you want isn't so important anymore. As I mentioned earlier, you don't activate that vibration of need. And then the stuff comes in a lot easier because you're
Mm.
not needing it to be happy. You figured out now how I can be happy without anything external changing whatsoever.
That's amazing. Wow, I love this. There's so much there. Um, Tell people how they can find out more about Taya and about you and connect with you.
Certainly. The website is thestreamofdavid.com, and the practice is the Taya Practice, the TYA Practice. And the book is on Amazon. Like I said, hardcover, paperback, and Kindle has been on for almost a year now, coming up, I think, in November. And the audiobook is launching very soon. Within days, hopefully, we'll have the audiobook out. It's all done and uploaded to Audible. So the TYA Practice is the practice. And that's the stream is wonderful. You can listen to my podcast, The Stream of David, and hear me channel the stream. People do love hearing from source directly in my channeling of source consciousness that I call the stream. But the Taya Practice is really where the magic is. And you can learn it through the podcast. You can learn it through the book. I do have a coaching program that you can learn it. I always say don't really dive into that until you really know that it's the right thing for you. But I teach it everywhere. I've been teaching it on this podcast, so it just oozes out of me.
Yeah, you
Well, it's a
have given us
system.
a
We
lot.
need a system to make these things our new way of life if you choose to do it. And if you just, listen to something and you're inspired, that's great. But how do you really apply it in your everyday life? And that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, that practicality is so fundamental for actual step-by-step change, for sure. Well, David, I have loved this. Thank you so much for being on today, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing with your live stream.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you for letting me share so openly, because I just love talking about this stuff.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Meditation Conversation. I'd be so grateful if you would share this episode with someone in your life who would appreciate it. Your sharing helps build momentum and make high vibrational content such as this more accessible and easier to find. I'd also be so grateful for you to subscribe to this content. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to the next meditation conversation.